Hello, I'm Dr. Eric Potter from Sanctuary Functional Medicine, where we are helping patients live healthier, more abundant lives. We are starting our 2019 series on mold, and. We'll be talking a lot of ands, different issues that interconnect with mold, but we're going to start off a little bit about my story, my family story with mold, and what got me into caring for mold patients when much of the conventional medicine world doubted whether or not still doubts whether or not mold toxicity truly exists. So if any of you are out there, please do give me a little beep that you can hear me. Hopefully everything's coming through. We did test things beforehand, so with that, if you can hear me, say hello. But I want to get started. Again, Sanctuary Functional Medicine, we are located off Holiday Court, just a little bit off the interstate in Franklin, Tennessee. We've been here for actually 2 going on 3 years now. It's amazing. We'll be having our 5-year anniversary here this year, just as a clinic. I've been taking care of patients, a lot of different illnesses, but mold has kind of become a big part of what we do. And the story behind that, again, is that I was seeing patients who are coming with unexplained symptoms, symptoms across multiple body systems, things that multiple other doctors, sometimes 15 or 20 even, other doctors had not been able to diagnose. And we are starting to get the idea that mold toxicity is somewhat of an epidemic. Suddenly, I look around in my own family and realize that actually I have family who has mold toxicity. My son and daughter and my wife. And as we started looking further into where we were living and finding mold and starting to do the lab test to diagnose that, we were realizing that my daughter's anxiety, her hand washing obsessions, a lot of her fears were probably related to that. She was having pediatric autoimmune neuropsychiatric syndrome, PANS, or PANDAS that you may have heard of. With that, we started looking and realizing my son's math, he was struggling. He was still doing okay in math. He'd always been great, but he was slowing down. And we thought maybe he was just being a teenager, a little grumpy, but turns out that was one of the manifestations for him was irritability as we were living in mold, and my wife's fatigue, some random pains, a lot of other symptoms, brain fog. So as we went through that, mold became an enemy for our family, wanting to take care of my children and set them free from how they were being affected. Also, then realizing coming back to my patients, there wasn't anywhere else to go. If I didn't take care of them, they were not going to get help. There's nobody else that really will handle mold toxicity anywhere nearby. So we dug into that, dove in, and have not gone back from diving down that rabbit hole. So now, why do then, as a clinic, do we look at fighting mold? Again, I hinted at the fact it seems like it's everywhere. It's ubiquitous. There's, depending on where you look, you can say that a quarter to half of houses may have some mold in it. Some would say up to 85% of commercial buildings have some water damage, which you need water to grow mold. And if you're going into Kroger, if you're going into department stores, big box stores, you're probably being exposed if you've had a leak from a faucet, from a washer or dryer, well, not dryer, but for washers, roof leak, had some flooding, there's a decent chance that you've had water there long enough that mold could be growing. Once it starts growing, it just takes some humidity for some of the types of mold to continue growing and put off toxins, which we will talk more about later. It's also, I love a good challenge. Mold is, I hate to say it, but a worthy opponent. It is not easy to help people. It affects so many different parts of our body that it's not just, oh, here, take this pill and we go get better. It is walking through with patients both the physical, biological aspects, the clinical aspects, and also the spiritual side of just you feel like you're being attacked, you don't feel safe. Helping patients know how to care for not only their bodies but also their hearts. as they go through this, their spirits. With that, it interferes with life. It brings a lot of chaos into people's lives. It disrupts because it disrupts how you feel, how you perceive things, both physically. Things that normally should just be a soft touch become painful. Things that walking, you have joints hurt that normally didn't. It may be that when you are talking with a family member, you're perceiving some emotions that aren't really there. Your ability to recognize emotions in others is hindered. So there's a lot of relational issues, and we see a lot of our families who have gone through even divorces or great difficulties in their family, in their wider family, from having mold because others don't believe it. And there's a lot of emotions that are tied up, and then once you discover it, there's a lot of fear to learn how to stay away from mold, which is one of the key parts of being safe with mold and getting free of it. And so, in a sense, mold is very almost dehumanizing. It attacks at your body. It attacks at your brain, your ability to think. My son's math was struggling, and now that he's been away from it in detox, he's going back to his understanding of math and doing great in it again. You may not be able to think clearly about making decisions, so others may get frustrated with you because you're not able to make decisions as easily. Emotionally, you're not able to feel. You may say your mood swings can be like a major roller coaster. Your emotions can turn on a dime from being calm to just being complete all-out panic as it disrupts your limbic system, which is your fight or flight response. It affects your social relationships, like I said earlier. If you're not able to perceive or understand what others are saying, both in decision making and in the emotional perception aspect, or to process it, because to some degree, your frontal lobes, which is where your decision making, and your emotions, which is the limbic system more in the middle, don't connect well. So you're not able to turn down emotions. I describe it as if someone came up behind you and said, "Boo," and you startled. And you look back and you saw it was your spouse or one of your kids. You might be a little agitated agitated them for having done that, but you're not scared because you know it's not a bear or it's not an intruder, someone holding a gun. Whereas a patient whose limbic system and frontal lobes are not communicating well, you may look back and your frontal cortex says, "Oh, hey, it's just my neighbor, my son, whoever it is. I should calm down now." But the emotions are like, "Oh, I don't hear you. I'm going to stay adrenaline rushing." They may be heart pounding, racing, feel revved up, blood pressure even go up, heart rate go up for hours. Or they may just live in that state because their frontal cortex can never turn things down. So it is a disabling and dehumanizing, I would say, and another point we'll talk about it, it even seems to attack the very image of God in man, because who we are made is to be, to do, to relate to others, to produce, to create, to enjoy life. With that, mold tries to steal that. So I do think it is one of the manifestations of evil in how it tries to destroy people and relationships and families. So with that, how do you win? Well, first of all, you have to understand it scientifically. If you do not understand the way it is affecting inside your body, how it turns the immune system down against invaders and up against you, so it can create autoimmunity, how it affects hormones, how it affects the mitochondria, causing pseudohypoxia, meaning it feels like you don't get enough oxygen, you're short of breath, but it's because you're not getting enough blood flow all to your peripheral tissue. It's like having an interstate with no exits. Your body carries oxygen around in your blood, but because you are lower in capillaries, the blood vessels that drop off oxygen, like exits on an interstate, you're not able to drop that oxygen, and the tissues are starving all the time. It makes you feel short of breath because your mitochondria are hindered, so the powerhouses that make energy for your body are hindered. So it interferes with your ability to function in those ways. So you have to understand that. You understand how it gets into your body and why some people are able to be around mold, and that's part of the issue in a lot of relationships. Is a spouse may say, "Hey, I've lived in this house. I feel great. There's not anything wrong with me," and the other spouse is like, "I feel horrendous. I can't get out of bed. I can't sleep. I have food allergies. I have rashes. I have breathing trouble. I'm sick, it's got to be the house. Other spouse, hey, I'm not sick, it can't be the house. Well, the problem is, yes, a lot of people are allergic to mold, but the bigger issue is about 1 out of 4 have genetics in their HLA, human leukocyte antigen. Basically, it's part of your immune system that helps recognize the bad guys. If you are in the 1 out of 4 who don't recognize biotoxins, mold, Lyme, ciguatera, some other toxins from toxic algae in lakes and rivers, your body can't recognize, bring that in and chew it up and spit it out and destroy it. 3 out of 4 can do that, so those toxins don't build up in them, and then they don't trigger further neurologic, immune system, GI reactions. They're like, oh, the body gets rid of it, never a problem. But those who are in 1 out of 4 genetics, and we can test those, and we do that in our patients, they can't get rid of those toxins. It's like the bucket that keeps filling up until it spills over, sets off a chronic inflammatory response syndrome, CIRS, C-I-R-S. With that, you have this ongoing smoldering inflammation, never quite goes away, just keeps building and building, and then that tips over. Again, hormones, leaky gut, mast cell activation with allergy symptoms, histamine reactions, neurologic, random pains, and just joint pains, headaches, so many different things from that chronic inflammatory response syndrome. We have to also understand it spiritually because for many, they do recognize it feels like it's pursuing them, and do encourage patients, this and other things, to pray for their health, to pray that God will guide us as their physicians and assistants and nurses to have wisdom, to see when something needs to be changed, to see what therapies are working or what's not, or what you need more of or less of. To pray that God gives you wisdom and insight into where that mold is hiding. Many come to us and say, oh, we just moved into a brand new house. There is no way, absolutely not, that there's mold in that house. Brand new. Well, did you watch the whole time? Did it not rain once during the 6 or 9 months that house was being built? Do you know that they sealed off every crack with the caulk in the window? Do you know that there's not been excess humidity, especially in the summer if you got 90% humidity, or it feels like 110 some summers? How do you know once they put those drywall up, they put walls up, that there's not something lurking behind there? Even in good construction, because we build houses so tight, so airtight that it doesn't let air get out. With that, there's moisture trapped in those walls, crawl spaces, attics, that can't get out and that can feed the mold. But if you have a construction error where, oops, a little bit of caulk was left out, or there's that seal did not get between those two pipes quite as tight as you would hope, that little tiny drip could be enough to feed mold. And there's times when we've seen pictures of patients who find toadstools actually growing in the walls. They pull off some drywall and there'd be not just fuzzy black, white, gray, whatever stuff, but actual toadstool growing up out of their wall. So those are things we are going to have patients look for, and feels like they're being chased. We have to help them know how to handle that in the home. We have to help them know how to pray in finding where those things are. So, and then from that, we have to attack, knowing the right therapies. One, to get the person away, first time, get the victim away from the perpetrator. Mold, which mold, biotoxins, I'll take a minute to talk about that. Biotoxins are things made by organisms, chemicals, that affect other organisms, in this case humans, to cause dysfunction. It's a defense mechanism. Those organisms are trying to win out over others. Mainly for molds, they're trying to kill each other. They're trying to kill bacteria. They don't want other things to grow into their space. They're kind of protecting their water supply. For us, we breathe those in as VOCs, volatile organic compounds. Those things are mostly things that we're breathing in through the air into our lungs, get into our sinuses, absorb through our sinus cavities, and then it affects our body. So with that, we are trying to help them get away from the mold and those chemicals the mold's releasing, or because another biotoxin is Lyme, we not only treat the infection of Lyme, but we also help detox patients from Lyme, and sometimes that's the reason they can't get over their Lyme disease, is because it was just treated as an infection, but nobody took the time to see that they have those genetics where they don't clear Lyme toxins out as well. So what we're doing is trying to do this, get the patient away, and then we start attacking the mold in them, meaning giving them what's called binders. It's chemical substances that your body is trying to, the one way it can, two ways it can still try to get rid of mold toxins are putting it into your bile, in your gallbladder, and squirting out. The problem is, if there's nothing there to catch it, it will get soaked back up in, and it's kind of like having the drain go back and then back into the top of the bucket. You really don't get rid of it. Giving binders catches it, binds to it, and then it comes out with your bowel movement. The other way is to help you use glutathione, which is a great antioxidant for a ton of different detox things and our body's own oxidative stress defense mechanisms, but also to help that give you more glutathione and vitamin C, so that way you are binding and can urinate that out. We do see that patients' amount of toxins, microtoxins, mold toxins in the urine will go up when we do that. Now, we're opening as many doors, getting that out. In the meantime, supporting you with different therapies. Some of the things that's already been triggered by mold toxicity, we're wanting to treat those. So in the short run, while we're trying to get the toxins out, you feel better and not worse. Although first week or two sometimes can be a little worse before you do start getting better. These things can take anywhere from 1 to 3 months for younger kids. We do treat kids for mold toxicity. It can be as much as 6, 12, 18, 24 months for someone who is having Alzheimer's symptoms from mold toxicity, because they've been built up the amount of these toxins over even decades from multiple exposures. So with that, it's also personalized, so each person's different. We have some patients who gain 50 pounds, some people who lose 50 pounds, some people who have more of the neurologic symptoms, the pain, the headaches, the random moving, sharp, jabbing pain in their head. Other patients who are having more of the hormones. Other people have more of the leaky gut, where they have food sensitivities and only eat 4 or 5 foods that are options for them. So with that, we're going to make it unique for that person sitting in front of us, make little adjustments as we go along, and then we're, again, going to attack this from the spiritual side and relationally, help others in the family understand. Often we have to explain things or give them letters so employers or family members can understand what's going on, that we have objective labs, we have a pattern of symptoms, and it all makes sense. And as they get away from the mold and they start doing better, the labs get better, their symptoms go away, they can start showing the family, nope, it wasn't all in my head, it was actually in my house. So with that, we want to help patients walk through that. So another question patients will ask is, how do I know if I'm mold toxic? We're going to focus more on the symptoms next time. I think there's a number of questions I'm going to work through that people have sent in already, and you can still send in your questions now on leaving them on Facebook, and we'll try to get to those. But I'm going to start with some that patients or the public audience had already sent in. I do want to note, as I wrap up this introductory part and get into more of the dialogue of the questions, is to make sure that you understand this is not a medical treatment. We're talking, we're trying to educate, helping you answer a few questions. I can't answer, oh, what dose is for you, or should you not take this medicine, or should you not take this supplement. What I'm going to do is tell you what some of the things we've done and how we have helped some patients, and hopefully give you an idea of whether you need to look into mold as a possibility, or if you're already dealing with it, maybe answer some questions that help you take care of yourself better. So we want to educate and empower. And with that, I'm going to switch over to that. If you have you're not seeing us as a patient and want to, we do have opportunities in the coming, I think it's about 2 months out now as far as scheduling new patients, but Stephen, who is our relations manager, can help with that in terms of 615-815-5941. Almost forgot the number. Anyway, let's get to some questions. Please leave those on here if you have others as we go through this. So first of all, I'm just going to start from the top. So this is actually someone who will be coming in to see us and to go over mold-related tests. From research on the SIRS, particularly Dr. Shoemaker's protocol, see that cholestyramine seems to be the main binder to remove toxins, been proven effective. One can become sicker if you take it while exposed to mold. So the pressing question resolves around the conundrum that we are exposed to mold all the time. Nowhere you can go to be completely remote from mold spores. Realize that a body might have a greater load if you're living constantly in a heavily molded environment, but even if you're not, you could be exposed in your restaurant, doctor's office, other people's homes. So how does this all work? Also, if you're re-exposed, you have to start back all over again with a treatment. Again, seems to me that you can't avoid re-exposure. Also, why would you get sicker while you're in cholestyramine if you're re-exposed? Wouldn't just bind to the new round of toxins as well as the old? So thank you for that question. There's a lot there, but I'm going to try to put that into perspective of both what my own family is going through and what we're walking through with patients. So yes, if you're exposed to mold, you're one of those 1 in 4 that don't detox it well. It builds up and starts triggering reactions in a multitude of ways that we'll talk more about in a couple of weeks. But with that, the first critical step is getting away from the mold. If you try to use cholestyramine during that heavier exposure, yes, you can have worse symptoms. And what happens is, as you take cholestyramine, your body starts releasing a number of those toxins that are stored in your body in fat tissue in different places. If you're still being exposed, then you kind of get a little double whammy. You get some from the inside and the outside, and your receptors that are being triggered by that mold sometimes get worse rather than getting better. So that is some of the experience from Shoemaker noticed that, and that seems to be the best explanation that anyone has determined. But it is very common that patients who are still being exposed will get worse rather than better. So that's why that getting away from it is the first critical step. Now, then it comes like, well, how in the world, if mold is literally everywhere, and it is, do I get away from it? Well, first of all, not all molds make toxins. And not even those ones that make toxins make them all the time. They do so more when they're in competition. And the outdoor molds don't typically make as much. So a lot of the molds that you may get out in the woods, you may have no effect from. You may be allergic to, but you're not going to be toxic from. Besides that, wind is blowing, it's blowing away any toxins that might come up. Whereas in a house that's tight, air's not flowing through, you may find that those toxins build up and you're breathing those day in and day out. You're not filtering your air, purifying your air. With high humidity, it keeps growing, producing more toxins. And because it's just enough to grow, but not enough for everybody to be happy, they're all fighting. The molds and bacteria are fighting, which besides mold, there's bacteria that can grow in that water damage that produce toxins as well, and something called actinomyces, which we can talk about another day. But they're producing toxins. So in the house or in a commercial building, those toxins can build up. There's not competition. There's controlled temperature. Outside you have cold, kills off some of it. Really hot may kill off some of it. In a house or a commercial building where it's always 65 to say 75 or 80 at the most, it's a perfect temperature for that mold to keep growing and growing. So again, how in the world do you stay away from it? Well, first of all, when you're really sick, when your chronic inflammatory response syndrome is all flared up, if you get away from it and you detox, you can eventually be less sensitive. But if that level just goes down a little bit and you put some more exposure back in, your bucket is still full enough that it overflows. But if you get that total amount in your body, the toxic burden, down, you can take a little bit now and then without reacting. So with that, we do have patients, one, making sure they're having a safe living environment. If they're working and that's one of the exposures, they may look at changing jobs, changing offices in their building, getting air purifiers that can help. A lot of times when patients are like, well, how do I go shopping? Sometimes you have the click list with some of where you call in and they deliver your groceries. My wife does that. Saves her from having to go in. If she does have to run into a grocery store, she'll wear a VOG mask, and then there's some other masks that you can do that basically filter out those chemicals. Now, doesn't mean you can go wear that mask in a moldy house and be safe, but if you're just running in and out of the store for 15, 20 minutes or even an hour, a lot of our patients can tolerate that, whereas if they went into that same store without a mask on, they get very sick. So we help patients learn where their exposures are. Also, we have patients who can be around this much mold and they are set off for a week. Other people, they can go in that same store and not really bother me that much. I don't advise going into stores where there's mold, even if you don't feel it. But yes, some are more super sensitized, and as you start treatment, they sometimes get more sensitive. As you get the bucket lower, then they can tell when they've been exposed. If their bucket's overflowing, they can't really tell from one day to the next because the symptoms are always there. So we do help people learn to stay away from that. The glutathione is something, if somebody gets an accidental exposure, we'll encourage them to take some extra doses, and many will find that takes the edge off. So instead of being sick for a day or two, they may be better in an hour or two from taking extra glutathione, be able to knock down the oxidative stress and to detox that a little bit. But with that, we are trying to, yes, encourage them to find a safe place in their home, if they're working, a safe place in their workplace, and then to think about where they go and where they visit. Yes, at the holidays recently, a lot of patients who would either change plans, have family come to see them, or we'll talk to them about diffusing some essential oils that will have the ability to knock down levels. Maybe it's not going to, if you've got mold growing behind a wall, diffusing some oils is not going to get rid of that. But where you may be visiting the in-laws or your own parents or brothers and sisters and so forth, it can make something a little safer, especially if they'll allow you to send it. They'll diffuse it for a day before you visit. A lot did that. But then I had others who did make different plans because they did an environmental relative mold index, ERMI test, and found out that family member's house was horrible on the mold. So it's a lot of decisions. It changes where you can travel. Hotel rooms can be moldy. Then again, I've had some patients who tested hotel rooms and they were extremely safe. So it is just having to think. Yes, you have to think about where you go, where you visit, and what you allow yourself to be exposed to, especially during the treatment. And then again, towards the end, you actually can be potentially some. You never want to go and just wallow in it and roll around in mold and live in it again, but at least you're not having those severe symptoms that you used to when you're in the midst of the initial problem. So I'm going to move on to another question. And is there a lab test that diagnoses mold toxicity? What is that test and who can order it? So thank you, Cindy. There are different groups out there advocating different ways to diagnose mold toxicity. Shoemaker, who is one of the original doctors who alerted others to it, that there are biotoxins, especially mold, that can make people very sick, uses an approach where he tests your body's reaction, certain immune system markers, hormonal markers, and some others that will tell you if there's a pattern. You have the symptoms in multiple systems that then include a certain number of these positive tests, and it's not all the tests, because some people have one test normal and the other abnormal, and then flip-flop for the next patient. But a certain number of those tests, there's not anything else that could explain it. We look for other infections, we look for other hormonal issues, nothing else is there. Then we're going to look for that and say, yes, it's a clinical plus some lab confirmation combination. There's another group that will look at urine testing, where it says, oh, if you've got high levels of ochratoxin, aflatoxin, trichothecenes in your urine and you have the symptoms, then you probably have mold toxicity. Now, the issue with that is, my concern, and the reason I do more of the Shoemaker approach, is the fact that using those tests, you have some people, they get rid of mold toxins, they can be around it, they aren't reacting. You do all the reactive tests, they're normal, but then they have a bunch of mold toxins in their urine. They're not sick. And their genetics are good. So those patients don't need to necessarily mold detox. Maybe they need to at least be aware that they're being exposed to mold. They may want to make some changes, but they're not mold toxic, what we're talking about with our patients. So with that, we do lean more towards using the reactive, the C4A, TGF-beta1, MMP9, VIP, alpha MSH, ADH. There's some other labs in there looking at HLA genetics. Again, it's not just one test. It is a combination of those with a good history and somebody's being exposed. Now, we do have patients who look around, can't find that they're exposed, and it realizes probably was a year, 2 years, even 5 years ago that they had the mold exposure, but at some point they need to have had that. And then people ask, well, what if I have good genetics? 1 out of 100 of our patients, we've only got about 2 or 3 patients who have had good genetics. who I'm sure they are mold toxic despite their good genetics. So there may be other genetics we don't have tests or aware of yet, but for the most part, it's the genetics, exposure, the symptoms, and set of labs where it does match up with that. You can get those through a doctor. You can get some of those tests online on your own from these test yourself companies, but then you've got to have somebody help you to understand how to interpret those. The next question, let's see where we're on time. Good, we're doing all right. What kind of environmental testing for mold is valid and straight to the point? Who do we look for? There is no perfect mold environmental test. We use what's called an ERMI, Environmental Relative Mold Index, where it does PCR, meaning testing for DNA, of molds to compare dry and wet molds, wet being the ones that are toxic, to see if those levels in a building are higher. It also looks at the HERTSME2. It's a health-related index. It takes the 5 of the bad molds, 2 of the Aspergillus, Chaetonium, Lillemii, and Stachybotrys, and looks at levels of those to estimate how much those may be having effect on patients' health. But that's not a perfect test. It's a rough estimate. You also want somebody to look at other ways, whether it's having a remediator. If you're aware of a musty smell, water damage, or you see mold, it's not just, oh, let's do a test. You can do tape tests. You can do spore trap sampling. You can do compare indoor and outdoor. You can do plates where you sit down and see if mold settles down and grows on those plates and send those in for identification. There's not a perfect, we just use the ERMI and the HERTSME2 combination because it gets a good starting point. And then from there we will consider what's the best test, even how you do that test with a vacuum or just doing a Swiffer. You can use those tests on cars, workplaces, and so forth. So we help people determine that because in one situation, one test might be a better choice, in another situation, a different one. The ERMI also is best correlated with health symptoms in terms of Shoemaker and experience with a few thousand patients that they've treated as a group for the SIRS. Next question. We've had our home treated at least 3 times the last 7 months. However, I'm finding that I wheeze at night only, wondering if prior exposure to mold caused an asthma adult onset. And then kind of in that is, can a house ever be clean enough, or is a move still to be considered? Thank you, Sabine. With that is the fact that many patients, yes, finding mold, you find one round, get it cleaned up. You have to do it well because if you don't find all the sources, you can have recontamination, especially when, again, you're the super sensitive. So many patients go through 2 or 3 rounds of finding things. We did as well in a rental home and eventually did have to move out. Then again, we have many who, after 1 or 2 or 3 times, are able to make their home very safe for themselves to live in. Sometimes older homes, if they've not been repaired well on the way, yes, it's hard to fix things from whether you have running water under your crawl space or in your basement, or patient with a actual spring coming up in their basement and running out. It's hard to lower moisture when you have spring water coming up. It would seem like a great idea, a great safe spring source, a water source, but not great if you've got a basement that has mold growing in it to have that. So it's cleaning it up and then keeping it clean from dehumidifiers, air purification systems. We're looking at some different ways of helping patients not only get their house clean, but to keep it that way so that down the road, in a year, 2 years, 5 years, they're not having re-exposure or go backwards, which is another question. One of the earlier questions I didn't get to was just, yes, when you get exposed again, you do get set back. If you've gotten far enough, you don't start at 0 again. It's not like if you've ever played Candyland with your kids where you're going back to the very beginning. You may take 10 steps back, but if we've gotten you down the road, we've also taught you how to recognize it. So you stop that slide at 10, or the chutes and ladders. You don't have that one where you go back practically to 0. You go back some, we catch it, and we get you moving forward again. So that's the other reason helpful to have somebody monitoring you is make those setbacks small ones rather than big ones. So another question is a great one from Wendy. Conflicting reports on what to do with personal belongings when leaving a moldy home. basically everything from leave it all behind, or you can clean your furniture and clothes. So what's my opinion? What to do with clothing and furniture, wood versus porous sofas, computers, other electronics, dishes, pots, pans, paper products, and photos. If we can clean any of them, what do we clean it with? Can't. Can we safely move them in plastic bins in our new home, or will that cross-contaminate? So with that, that's something we're facing right now. I will tell you both our personal experience in our family and also what we got with patients. So one thing it comes down to is there are patients who, yes, we ultimately, after trying to remediate things, they do start over. We've had a few that have had to literally throw everything away, clothes, books, furniture, and get rid of it. But then again, especially, I would say absolutely, if you see mold growing on something, it's got to go. I'm not going to advise anyone, whether it's furniture, a book, if you see mold, unless it's some priceless or antique or irreplaceable thing, and we do have a family Bible where we boxed up plastic and sealed up, and we're going to keep it. But we keep it away where it's safe, keep it in storage. So we still have it, but it is put away. There are a number of things we have not yet cleaned. We have put in storage, and we'll pull things out to kind of make sure, see if we react to things, and use different cleaning methods to do so. And I'll talk about those in a minute. So first of all, yes, there's a few people who do end up needing to leave the home, move away, replace belongings. Most can work with one, starting with getting rid of any visible mold, contaminated objects. And then considering those porous objects. If it's something you can replace, doesn't cost too much, you may want to just be on the safe side and throw it away. We had a number of books that we weren't reading, and we were like, well, we can buy another. If we want another one, you can get it on Kindle or just throw it, or we can buy another one. And we did get rid of those. We either donated or we just threw a lot of things away. A lot of things out of our garage. It was like, the pack rat side of me was treated well, and that we threw away the stuff, all the things that we thought, we'll keep this around in case we ever use it. Just throw those things away. But if you get to things, books that like, we can't replace, or we really do need this, or we can't afford to replace this book or furniture, some things can be remediated. And for me to say your particular furniture, can it be? I can't. That's why you need to have a remediator. I can guide you in understanding what good remediation is, but I'm not the one to be doing it for you. So with that, there are some times that you can remediate. You can use HEPA to clean things, and then use different fogging chemicals that are safe, that are not harmful. There are some out there that have phenols in them that can actually trigger kids to have reactions. If they are sensitive to phenols, I would not use that type of mold killer, that fungicide. But there are many other ways to do that. Shoemaker advocates something called aerosolver that drops those particles out of the air, and then they wipe everything down. So besides that, some people have to do more than others. The other main principle I would say is there's not one treatment where, we spray this, or we just dig this out of the wall and pull this. It is a combination. You want to lower humidity. You want to purify the air. If you find mold growing, when you remove it, you want to make sure it's not spreading other place. So you kind of have that contained and get that out of your house safely without dragging it, bursting open and contaminating everything else you have. You do want to look at some products that will clean clothes. There's some different products that will do that. Clean upholstery. We did throw away mattresses and bought some new ones and kept them in until we could get out of that house, and kept them in plastic bags. You can look at, we have got rid of a lot of furniture that had been in moldy houses we had lived in before. With that, we have a lot of plastic bags right now, boxes where we've stored things, and again stored some things in storage and not brought it out yet. So we are testing, we are working through that, we are taking it kind of step by step. Everybody's a little different, and that's why having, again, someone to guide you, you can determine, yes, can we keep this furniture? No, can we not? Did the house get clean enough? Did it not? Do you need to do another spray, or do we need to get rid of clothes? So helping patients work through that is part of besides just diagnosing and giving you a prescription or supplement recommendation for binders, it's helping you know how to live your life differently so you don't stay sick and don't get sick again. And then there's the further question about urine microtoxin testing. So I mentioned that a little bit earlier, in just the fact that we use it occasionally to help patients realize, yep, we've got mold toxins in there, or if we're looking at whether it's mold or Lyme, we will sometimes consider that. If the mold toxins were not present, we might look more that it's Lyme as the bigger issue. Or if it's in the court case, sometimes that will be a helpful addition. But our mainstay is still going to be more of a shoemaker approach, where we're looking at the body's markers, immune, neurologic, hormonal, to mold toxicities, rather than just looking at whether you have it or not, because that could have been that you ate a moldy piece of cheese the day before. So there's not good science to tell us, yes, when you eat some food with mold in it, some of that comes out in your body, but you don't necessarily get toxic from it. How can family members and close friends support families dealing with mold toxicity and remediation? Resources they can refer to for more understanding of illness and its toll. So the Surviving Mold website by Shoemaker has a lot of great resources. There's some helpful books there. I would encourage them to listen to what we're doing every couple of weeks with this Facebook Live. I'll also be putting together, as we do these live Facebooks, we're going to be putting together some more guidance for patients and family members to understand, to realize, yep, this is real, but it is something that can be overcome. But the other thing I would say is just pray. Praying against this and helping people to get through a time when it's very dark, they can't see clearly, and they feel very weak and worn, and sometimes feel like they're despairing that they can't get out of this, is family members to be patient and understand that some of those emotions, those mood swings, are not at them, but it's because of mold. With that, you are needing more than just a simple one-size-fits-all. You've got to have people guiding you through that, or getting a support group where others or have been through that and can encourage. Be careful, some of those groups, though, are all the people who have never gotten over it, so you may get pretty despondent when you say, oh, I've been sick for 30 years and nobody's ever helped me. Well, there are tons of people who have overcome this. It is a battle, and you may have some war wounds that take a little while to heal, but don't get despondent if everybody in that Facebook group says they're still sick. You might want to find a group that says, oh, we have overcome it. So I'm going to get to, there's a number that have come in. The 1 in 4 people who are not able to detox, are you referring to MTHFR? Nope. MTHFR affects glutathione, so you can have some side effects in that, and MTHFR helps detox some other things, but MTHFR patients aren't necessarily super more sensitive to mold or insensitive. So this is HLA genetics, which have to do with the immune system, completely different. And just so you know, you cannot find out your HLA genetics from a 23andMe or the other genetic test, just because there's usually 2 to 3 parts to your HLA, like a 4,353 are sensitive, or 11,352B is 3 parts. In a lot of the 23andMe, you might be able to determine 1 part, but you can't get all 3, and you need all 3 of those to know whether or not you would be sensitive to mold. So a lot of people who are very much into the research have tried to determine, and you really can't. You're just kind of holding your thumb up in the wind and taking a guess. You really have to do the separate genetics on your own. So Katie has a question: can mold be a problem for people with COPD? Yes. So mold can mimic asthma and COPD in the fact that it can cause, with transforming growth factor beta 1 going up, can cause fibrosis. So it can make you feel like you have wheezing, but you don't respond to albuterol very well. If it is causing thickening in the airways, you don't get air in and out, so it's somewhat similar to COPD. Someone who already has COPD, yes, it can make it even worse. Especially someone with COPD or asthma is using a lot of steroids, inhaled steroids, which are appropriate treatments for those diseases, but that can suppress the immune system and make some of those responses to the mold toxicities even worse. All right, we've got about 10 minutes. Actually trying to wrap it up in about 8 or 9 minutes. So I may go through these last questions a little fast, but I'll do my best. What is the gold standard product that should be used during mold remediation? The gold standard product is having a big toolbox, meaning you don't depend on one product, one approach. You want to do an immediate cleanup. You want to use products that clean up things as thoroughly as possible, and then you want to set up a perimeter of defense so mold doesn't find its way back. into your life. Dehumidifiers, purifiers, good building science. If you're able to build a house or moving into a house where you can do some things ahead of time, you can make it a safe place. But again, there is not one thing that you can do that's perfect, that's the nuclear bomb to blow away all mold and make it never come again. There isn't anything. From Sam, if you could get away from mold immediately, what are some steps you can take to alleviate symptoms? So it depends on what those symptoms are. So yeah, that's a broad term. We look at treating mast cell symptoms, allergy type histamine symptoms with anywhere from common antihistamines from prescriptions or over the counter to mast cell stabilizing therapies like quercetin or chondroitin. Those are some of the things if people are having food sensitivities. Doing some gut healing therapies or even a elemental diet. The quercetin also can help there, or doing some herbals that will calm down gut inflammation. If you're having neurologic symptoms, we may look at curcumin as being something that calms down the pain, inflammation, and helps people feel better during that time until they're trying to detox. Kathy, can extreme mold exposure from a decade ago still cause symptoms even if one is in a fairly clean environment? So yes, we have some patients, if you're in some of the worst HLA genetics, kind of the 1 in 100, like 4353, you may have years away from mold and not be able to get that out of your body and still have them ongoing. Not as sick as you would be if you were still in it, but yes, we see some patients who it's been years and we detox them and they get better. So that is a possibility, but I would say most people see some improvement within weeks to months of being out of it. But some may still have those lingering symptoms that they can't get away from until it's all detoxed. I think this is from Tara. Should stevia be eliminated when detoxing from mold? We do not. We will use stevia often as a biofilm disruptor for Lyme, so we will use that during mold detox if we're treating Lyme simultaneously. That should not be a problem as far as I'm aware of. If you have some research that maybe suggests that it is, we do. In looking at some of the non-shoemaker mold treatment protocols, they will look at using some different therapies. I thought I heard saw a question go through there. Yep, it's one of the other ones about Dr. Brewer's protocol for nasal colonization. So the idea that mold can be living inside you, I think that's not the common way. I do have some patients who I do believe that some of their toxins are auto-produced inside them. They've been documented by pulmonologists to have mold growing in, and they've been treated for that. But we will look at, is there any evidence that eating foods with mold on them? It's not really clear. Nobody's done an actual research study to say if you drink coffee with mold in it, or if you drink, I don't recommend eating moldy cheese. We do recommend patients staying away from some of those high fermented foods that can trigger histamine reactions. So it's not as much that it has mold in it, as more as the fact that it can make your symptoms worse. And just in case, and we do have some patients who can only drink certain brands of coffee because of potential mold toxins in that coffee. So that's a developing field. The agricultural world has a little better grip on that, but in the clinical world, for humans, we're still sorting that out. I think I'm down to the last question. Been able to incorporate on my old toxic mold summit. Would love your input on this. So the toxic mold summit was here recently. I'm actually going to be doing some upcoming blog posts, at least one a week, where I summarize some of those. I will say there was a lot of good information, especially on the remediating side of things, but there's a lot of different ways to do it, and there was some information that I would add to. There was some information, a lot that I would agree with, and some that I would like, I'm not sure that's a good one-size-fits-all for everybody. So that I'm hoping to work through some of those Toxic Mold Summit sessions. I just wrote one last night that I think is going to be coming out next week, if I remember correctly. So I'll try to get you some more information on that. But again, if you try to do a lot of this on your own, you're going to find that, oh, well, yeah, that's great, but I need somebody outside looking in. It's kind of like trying to get your bearings from inside of a tornado. You need to be able to have someone outside that's standing on firm ground looking in and guiding you on which direction you need to go next. Let's see, one last question. What about eating mushrooms, even superfoods like reishi? So We will use some medicinal mushrooms and some therapies specifically for treating Epstein-Barr virus, which commonly recurs in patients with mold toxicity. So I'm not against it, but I do advise patients that if you notice starting this, and we may wait and say, start everything else, add this in a week or two. If you notice that you have a weird reaction, it's possible. The mushrooms do have immune modulatory effects, but typically they're helping your immune system be stronger and smarter, not just in a negative way. So with that, I do use those, but I don't necessarily recommend, oh, what if I every day of my life I'm eating pizza with mushrooms on it. Number one, you're probably eating some inflammatory foods there, and I wouldn't necessarily say make that your staple diet. But then again, I wouldn't necessarily avoid those because mushrooms do have a lot of good health benefits as a superfood. So I've talked really fast, but I have gotten, I think, all that I can in this hour. So we're going to bring this to a close. Thank you, all of those that you've joined today, and thank you for all the great questions. We will be in 2 weeks having another session talking a little bit more about the symptoms, how you might know whether you, a loved one, or someone you know, otherwise know, might be mold toxic, how to recognize that from a symptom standpoint. And then we will work through after that on another session. We've got a lot of different ways that mold affects our lives and how to get better from mold toxicity. So with that, have a blessed day, and I look forward to seeing you all on here next time. Blessings.